The mainstream media is in a state of blind panic right now. Every news channel in Britain is showing the same 5 clips on a loop. Starmer's face white with rage, the graph of the pound sterling falling off a cliff, and political anchors with shocked, bewildered expressions repeating the words chaos over and over again. They are all reporting on the symptoms. They see the constitutional crisis, they see the government collapsing, they see the political fury, but they're all missing the cause. They are all desperately avoiding the central, terrifying truth of what has just happened. The real story is not the chaos. The real story is the weapon that caused it. It is a single piece of paper delivered by the King's private secretary that has undone 300 years of political convention. The real story is that King Charles has just used an ancient power, an old, dormant royal prerogative rooted in the constitutional crisis of 1834. This is a power so explosive, so absolute, that it was thought to be dead and buried. It is a power that constitutional experts have only ever discussed in hushed tones, believing no modern monarch would ever dare to use it. They were wrong. While other channels speculate, we have the details, we have the legal analysis, we can reveal the full text and the precise mechanism of the constitutional oversight prerogative that King Charles has just activated. This is the document that has given him the ironclad legal authority to crush Keir Starmer. This is not a symbolic gesture, it is a calculated, surgical and legally bulletproof declaration of war. It is a power that bypasses Parliament, bypasses the Supreme Court and strikes directly at the legitimacy of the Prime Minister himself. The hammer has fallen and it was forged in 1834. So what is this ancient power not used since 1834? It is not a vague tradition. It is a precise legal instrument known as the constitutional oversight prerogative. To understand what Starmer is facing, you have to understand what happened in 1834. King William IV saw that the government of the day had become paralysed by infighting and had, in his view, lost the confidence of the nation, even though it still held a majority in Parliament. The King used his prerogative to dismiss the government, forcing an election. That power was never abolished, it was simply never used. It was placed in a constitutional glass box marked break in case of extreme national emergency. For 190 years, every monarch, including Queen Elizabeth II, believed that no emergency was extreme enough to warrant breaking that glass until today at 9:47 a.m. This morning, King Charles convened an emergency session, not with politicians, but with 2 of Britain's foremost constitutional law experts flown in from Oxford at dawn, along with his former private secretary, the formidable Lord G. They did not review recent events, they reviewed historical precedents. For 90 minutes, they built an ironclad legal case. They argued that Starmer's government had triggered the exact same emergency conditions as in 1834, but on a modern, more dangerous scale. This was not an emotional outburst from the King. It was, as one insider described it, surgical precision meets royal fury. They determined that the government had deliberately and repeatedly acted in contempt of the constitutional balance and, crucially, had lost its moral legitimacy to govern. The document Charles signed is not a request. It is a formal legal notification. It does not ask Starmer to resign. It informs him that his government has been found in breach of its constitutional duty. This single document is the legal foundation for his removal. But why now? Why this king? And why this Prime Minister? The secret to the 9:47 a.m. meeting lies in the other documents on the table. They weren't just 19th century law books, they were files compiled by military charities and NHS whistleblowers detailing the human cost of the government's priorities. This was the evidence presented to the King, the final justification for activating the prerogative. The smoking gun was not a political scandal, but a moral one. The file on top was that of Mr. James Patterson, a 71-year-old Falklands veteran from Manchester. Mr. Patterson, who served his country for 20 years, was informed last week that his urgent hip replacement surgery, a surgery that would take him out of agonising constant pain, would be delayed for another 8 months due to non-critical budget reallocations. He now watches his grandson play football from a wheelchair. This single file was placed next to another document, leaked Cabinet Office expense reports from the previous month. They showed 3 of Keir Starmer's cabinet ministers had spent £47,000 of taxpayer money on a single 3-day trip to Brussels. The expenses included 5-star hotels, chauffeur-driven cars and dinners at restaurants where a single bottle of wine cost more than Mr Patterson's monthly pension. This contrast, the abandoned veteran in agony versus the lavish taxpayer-funded elite, was the core of the legal case. This wasn't just bad optics. It was, in the legal opinion of the experts assembled, a systemic abdication of duty and a violation of the sacred trust between the government and its people. This is what triggered the royal fury. This is what made the 1834 precedent legally viable. It moved the crisis from the realm of politics into the realm of a fundamental moral breach of the nation's constitutional balance. This moral breach is what led to the unprecedented, history-making moment at yesterday's Privy Council meeting. Normally, these meetings are a dry, procedural rubber stamping of government business lasting mere minutes. Yesterday, King Charles broke 70 years of royal protocol. He ordered the politicians to sit. Then, with what insiders described as barely contained fury, he read from a prepared statement. This was not just a speech, it was the formal verbal delivery of the constitutional oversight prerogative. He looked directly at the ministers present and declared, "Perhaps the time has come to remind this government and all future governments that they serve the people's will, not their own ambitions." Palace aides who have worked for the monarchy for decades said they had never heard anything like it. The room went dead silent. The king wasn't just expressing concern, he was issuing a formal royal rebuke, a direct warning shot. Constitutional experts watching this unfold were staggered. Professor David Harrison from Cambridge told reporters, "This is the closest thing to a royal reprimand we've seen since the abdication." The king had just publicly questioned the government's very legitimacy, but it was more than that. This speech was the activation. The final step was the legal document that followed. Minutes after the Privy Council meeting concluded, the king signed the formal letter, the one citing the 1834 precedent and outlining the moral breach regarding veterans and government spending. This document, the full text of the rebuke, was then hand-delivered to number 10 Downing Street by the King's private secretary, a former military man known for his unflinching demeanour. The scene in number 10, as described by witnesses, was one of pure, unadulterated chaos. When the King's private secretary entered the Prime Minister's office, Starmer reportedly smiled, believing it was a routine procedural matter. The smile vanished the moment the formal vellum document was placed on his desk. Witnesses say Starmer's face went sheet white as he read the title, citing the 1834 prerogative. He read the king's devastating words once, then twice, then he exploded. He reportedly slammed the document down on his antique desk with such force that his coffee mug jumped, fell and shattered on the floor. His chief of staff flinched. "This is a declaration of war," Starmer allegedly shouted, his voice shaking with rage. "He has no right. This is not a monarchy. It's a dictatorship." He grabbed his phone, ignoring his advisors, and yelled, "Get me the Attorney General! Get me the Cabinet Secretary! Get me everyone!" But as he was shouting, the final line of the King's letter burned in his mind. "The government has lost its way and the people have lost faith. My duty is to the latter." Starmer reportedly turned to his chief of staff, his face pale, and said, "Charles has just made the biggest mistake of his reign. He wants a war. He'll get one." The hammer had fallen and Starmer was already planning to strike back. But Starmer's furious declaration of war immediately slammed into a brutal ironclad legal wall. His first frantic call was to the Attorney General, demanding they file an immediate injunction with the Supreme Court to block the King's unconstitutional move. The Attorney General's reply, sources say, was chillingly calm. "Prime Minister, we can't." The nation's top lawyer reportedly said, "You don't understand. The royal prerogative is not subject to judicial review. It is a power above the courts." The lawyer explained the devastating trap. The Supreme Court can rule on government actions, but the constitutional oversight prerogative is a matter between the Crown and Parliament. The courts have no jurisdiction. Starmer was legally, constitutionally and totally powerless to stop it. Realising the legal avenues were locked, Starmer pivoted. His only remaining weapon was political. He would take his case to the public. He would frame this as a constitutional coup by an unelected king. He would rally the people against a tyrant. But what Starmer didn't know, and what the media has not yet reported, is that he had already been outmanoeuvred. The king was not acting alone. While Starmer was planning his PR war, the future of the monarchy was already moving against him. Behind the scenes, Prince William had been far more involved than anyone realised. Multiple sources confirmed that William, the Prince of Wales, held 2 secret private meetings at Kensington Palace, just 48 hours before his father's dramatic intervention. The meetings were deliberately kept off all official schedules. Security logs were scrubbed. Even senior palace staff were told to stay away from the West Wing that evening. The attendees were not aides. They were senior, high-ranking figures from the Conservative Party and, crucially, from Reform UK. What was discussed, nobody will say on the record, but one Conservative MP who attended described it as the most significant political conversation of his entire career. William didn't just express concerns, the MP revealed. He outlined a vision for how Britain needs to be governed, a vision of duty, honour and service to our veterans. And it was a vision that did not include Starmer anywhere in the picture. The younger prince, long seen as more progressive, had apparently reached his breaking point with Labour's privilege and disdain for the nation's institutions. And that matters. Because if both the current king and the heir apparent have turned against this government, Labour's position becomes completely, utterly untenable. Starmer wasn't just fighting the king. He was fighting the entire line of succession. The domino effect was immediate and catastrophic. The first entity to react wasn't Parliament or the public, it was the global market. Money moves faster than politics. Within 90 minutes of the King's formal letter being delivered to Number 10, the news had leaked from inside Starmer's own panicked government. The financial markets, which despise uncertainty above all else, reacted with sheer terror. The pound sterling, the symbol of Britain's economic stability, dropped 2.3% against the US dollar in a single trading session. This wasn't a dip, it was a nosedive. Billions of pounds were wiped from the London Stock Exchange in minutes. International investors from New York to Tokyo panicked. They saw the headlines. King moves against Prime Minister, constitutional crisis, and they hit the sell button. They were terrified that Britain, long seen as a bastion of political stability, was entering a period of genuine, unpredictable political chaos. But as the markets were in freefall, the second domino was already toppling. The Labour Party itself began to fracture from within. Starmer's authority, which was absolute just 24 hours ago, evaporated. Senior shadow cabinet members who had previously praised Starmer in public began frantically and anonymously briefing journalists, distancing themselves from his confrontational and suicidal stance. Deputy Leader Angela Rayner, Starmer's biggest internal rival, was overheard by 3 separate sources telling colleagues in a Commons hallway, "He's lost the plot. He's completely lost the plot. He's taken the entire party down with him."